The screams echoed through the sterile corridors of Metropolitan General Hospital at 2:47 a.m., piercing the usual quiet hum of overnight recovery. Dr. Kwame Mensah jerked awake in his on-call room, his heart hammering against his ribs as combat boots thundered past his door. Through the thin walls came sounds that didn't belong in a place of healing, shouted commands in English and Spanish, metal restraints clicking, the desperate pleading of voices he recognized. His patients. His people. No. Please, I just had surgery. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, a 42-year-old mother who'd received a kidney transplant just 18 hours earlier. Kwame had personally monitored her recovery, watched her cry with relief as her creatinine levels normalized for the first time in years. He threw open his door and stepped into chaos. Immigration and customs enforcement agents in tactical gear moved with military precision through the transplant recovery wing, checking IDs, yanking patients from their beds despite IV lines and fresh surgical wounds. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces twisted with fear and confusion. What the hell is happening here? Kwame's voice carried the authority of someone who'd saved hundreds of lives, but the lead agent barely glanced at him. ICE enforcement operation. Step back, sir. These are my patients. They're in critical recovery from major surgery. Kwame moved toward Maria's bed, where two agents were attempting to lift her despite her catheter and abdominal drainage tubes. The lead agent, a stocky man with cold gray eyes, stepped into Kwame's path. Are you Dr. Kwame Mensah? Yes, I'm the chief of transplant surgery. You cannot move these patients. It could kill them. We have credible reports of illegal organ trafficking at this facility. These individuals are being detained pending investigation. The words hit Kwame like a physical blow. Organ trafficking. In 12 years of practice, through medical school at Johns Hopkins and residency at Mayo Clinic, through countless successful transplants that had given people their lives back, no accusation had ever been leveled against his integrity. Not once. As if summoned by his bewilderment, Dr. Patricia Wells, the hospital administrator, appeared at his elbow. Her usually perfect auburn hair was disheveled, her silk blouse wrinkled as if she'd dressed in haste. Kwame, we need to talk. Now. She pulled him into an empty conference room while the chaos continued outside. Through the glass wall, they watched agents wheel Maria Santos toward the elevator, her face gray with pain and terror. Someone called 911 at midnight, Patricia said without preamble. Anonymous tip about illegal organ sales to international patients. The caller claimed you were running a trafficking ring, selling organs to wealthy foreigners while Americans died on waiting lists. Kwame stared at her. That's insane. Every organ we've transplanted is documented through UNOS. Every match is verified. We're celebrating our best success rate in the hospital's history. I know that. You know that. But ICE doesn't care about our protocols right now. They have a federal warrant. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. Kwame, they're talking about shutting down the entire transplant program. The room seemed to spin. Just yesterday, the hospital had held a celebration for their milestone 60 successful transplants in 6 months, with a 94% success rate. The local news had interviewed him about their innovative organ preservation techniques that allowed for longer transport times, enabling matches across greater distances. He'd spoken proudly about how their international patient program brought in revenue that funded care for uninsured Americans. Now, those same international patients were being dragged from their recovery beds like criminals. Who made the call? He asked. Anonymous. But Kwame. Patricia hesitated. There's more. The FBI is opening a formal investigation. They're going to want access to all patient records, all financial transactions, everything. Through the glass, he saw Ahmad Rafiq, a 19-year-old engineering student from Pakistan, whose father had sold everything they owned to pay for his liver transplant. Ahmad's new liver had been functioning perfectly, his bilirubin levels dropping steadily. Now agents were forcing him into a wheelchair despite his protest that he could barely sit upright. "This is racial profiling," Kwame said quietly. "Look at who they're taking. Not a single white patient has been touched." Patricia's face flushed. "Don't make this about race. This is about following federal law." "Is it because I noticed, Dr. Whitmore's cardiac patients in the East Wing haven't been disturbed? Neither have Dr. Peterson's orthopedic cases. Funny how the anonymous tip only mentioned the black surgeon's patients." The silence stretched between them until another scream echoed from the corridor. Elena Vasquez, just 16 years old, had received a heart transplant 6 days earlier. Her parents had worked 3 jobs each to afford the surgery that would save their daughter's life. Now she was crying in Spanish as agents ignored her mother's pleas. "I need to stop this," Kwame said, heading for the door. "Kwame, wait. There's something else." Patricia's voice stopped him cold. "The medical board is meeting tomorrow morning. There's going to be a vote on suspending your privileges pending the investigation." He turned back to face her. "Suspending my privileges, based on an anonymous phone call. Based on a federal investigation into serious allegations. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." Through the glass wall, Metropolitan General Hospital looked like a war zone. Families wept in waiting areas as their loved ones were taken away. Nurses stood helplessly by, some crying openly as patients they'd cared for were loaded into unmarked vans. The smell of disinfectant mixed with fear sweat, and the metallic taste of panic that seemed to coat everything. Dr. Kwame Mensah, who had dedicated his life to healing, watched his world collapse in real time. 18 hours earlier, the atmosphere at Metropolitan General had been entirely different. The hospital's main conference room buzzed with celebration as staff gathered for the quarterly medical achievements presentation. Kwame stood at the podium, his white coat immaculate, his smile genuine as he clicked through slides showing their transplant program's unprecedented success. 60 successful transplants in 6 months, he announced to enthusiastic applause. Our post-surgical infection rate is down to 1.2%, well below the national average of 3.8%. Patient satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. From the back of the room, Dr. Richard Whitmore's wife, Karen, watched with narrowed eyes. She sat apart from the celebrating medical staff, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. Unlike the doctors and nurses who hung on Kwame's every word, Karen's expression remained coldly skeptical. The International Patient Program has been particularly successful. Kwame continued. Not only are we providing life-saving care to patients from around the world, but the revenue from these cases has allowed us to establish the Uncompensated Care Fund, which has covered full transplant costs for 37 uninsured American patients. More applause. Doctor. Wells beamed from her seat in the front row. The hospital's board chairman nodded approvingly as Kwame explained how their innovative preservation techniques had extended viable organ transport time by 40%. But Karen Whitmore pulled out her phone, typing furiously. Her husband Richard sat 3 rows ahead, his shoulders tense beneath his expensive suit jacket. As Kwame described their next breakthrough, a new anti-rejection protocol that could revolutionize transplant medicine, Karen's fingers never stopped moving across her screen. "Any questions?" Kwame asked as his presentation ended. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a young resident, raised her hand. Dr. Mensah, how do you ensure organ allocation remains fair while running an international program? Excellent question. We follow UNO's protocols strictly. No paying patient, domestic or international, ever jumps ahead of someone based purely on ability to pay. Our international patients are matched through the same system, and many times they actually receive organs that couldn't be placed domestically due to geographic or timing constraints. From the back, Karen made a soft scoffing sound that only a few people noticed. As the crowd dispersed, staff members approached Kwame with congratulations and questions. He found himself surrounded by younger doctors eager to learn from his techniques, nurses sharing success stories about specific patients, administrators discussing expansion plans for the program. It was Dr. Sarah Kim, a surgical resident, who first voiced what several people were thinking. Dr. Mensah, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your success is inspiring to all of us from diverse backgrounds. Seeing a black surgeon lead the country in transplant innovation, it matters. Kwame smiled, genuinely touched. That means more to me than you know. Sarah, when I started medical school, there were 3 black students in my class of 180. Representation matters, but excellence matters more. That's what opens doors for the next generation. Near the coffee station, Karen Whitmore finished her final text message and slipped her phone back into her purse. She'd been documenting everything patient names mentioned in case studies, details about international transfers, financial figures Kwame had shared about program revenues. To anyone watching, she appeared to be taking notes like many others in the audience. But Karen wasn't interested in medical innovation. She was building a case. As the celebration wound down and staff returned to their duties, Kwame felt a rare moment of satisfaction. 12 years of 18-hour days, of studying surgical techniques until his eyes burned, of fighting for respect in a field where people who looked like him were rare. It was all paying off. His program was saving lives and changing the medical landscape. He had no way of knowing that in 7 hours, Karen Whitmore would dial 911 and destroy everything he'd built. The anonymous call came in at 11:47 p.m. to the FBI's tip line, routed through the emergency dispatch system with the urgency code that demanded immediate action. The voice was female, well-educated, speaking with the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed her words. I want to report organ trafficking at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Kwame Mensah is selling organs to wealthy international patients, while Americans die waiting. I have evidence. The dispatcher, trained to remain calm during crisis calls, asked standard questions. What type of evidence do you have? Ma'am. Financial records, patient lists. I know for a fact that organs are being allocated based on payment ability, not medical need. Poor Americans are dying while rich foreigners pay hundreds of thousands for black market organs. Are you a hospital employee? I can't identify myself. He has too much power, too many connections, but people need to know what he's doing. Lives are at stake. The call lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. By federal protocol, any report of organ trafficking required immediate investigation. ICE was notified within the hour. FBI agents were briefed by 1 a.m., and federal warrants were expedited through an emergency judicial review. No one questioned the timing, just hours after a public celebration of the very program being accused. No one noted the suspicious specificity of the claims, or wondered why an anonymous tipster would have access to detailed financial information. in a system designed to err on the side of caution. Allegations of life and death crimes triggered automatic responses. The machine of federal law enforcement ground into motion with devastating efficiency. At 2:30 a.m., tactical teams assembled in the hospital parking garage. Social workers were called in to handle the detention of patients, including several minors. Warrant paperwork was finalized for financial records, patient files, and communications from the entire transplant department. At 2:45 a.m., the first boots hit the hospital floor. Karen Whitmore stood at her bedroom window 3 miles away, watching news helicopters circle the hospital like vultures. Her phone buzzed with text messages from friends and colleagues who'd seen the early morning news reports. Federal raid at Metro General, organ trafficking investigation, international patients arrested. Her husband Richard lay sleeping beside her, unaware that his wife had just destroyed the career of his most successful colleague, unaware that she'd sacrificed innocent patients in her desperate gambit to save their own reputation. Because in 6 hours, the medical board would announce its own investigation, not into Kwame Mensah's transplant program, but into Dr. Richard Whitmore's cardiac surgery practice, where 3 patients had died in the past month due to surgical errors. Malpractice lawyers were circling, insurance companies were asking questions, and medical journals were preparing exposés about declining standards in cardiovascular surgery. Karen had needed a bigger story, something that would dominate the medical news cycle and push her husband's problems off the front page. Now she had one. The next morning brought chaos that rippled far beyond the hospital walls. News vans lined the street outside Metropolitan General as reporters breathlessly described the overnight raids. Social media exploded with speculation and outrage. Medical professionals across the country watched in horror as their colleagues were perp-walked past cameras, while patients in hospital gowns were loaded into ICE vehicles. Kwame sat in his lawyer's office, still wearing the same scrubs he'd thrown on during the raid 12 hours earlier. Margaret Chen, one of the city's top medical malpractice attorneys, reviewed the federal warrant with increasing disbelief. This is thin, Kwame, incredibly thin. An anonymous tip with no corroborating evidence, no financial irregularities flagged by hospital accounting, no complaints from patients or families. Then why did they act so fast? Because organ trafficking allegations trigger automatic federal response protocols. Once that 911 call was made, the system had to respond. Margaret set down the papers and studied his face. The question is who made that call, and why now? Through her office window, they could see protesters gathering outside the federal building. Some carried signs supporting Kwame, Justice for Dr. Mensah, and Stop Medical Racism. Others demanded investigations into all international medical programs. The story was evolving in real time, becoming a flashpoint for larger debates about immigration, healthcare access, and systemic bias. There's something else, Margaret said carefully. The medical board voted this morning. Your surgical privileges have been suspended pending the federal investigation. Kwame closed his eyes. Without surgical privileges, he couldn't operate, couldn't see patients, couldn't do the work that had defined his entire adult life. Worse, patients already scheduled for transplants would have to be reassigned to other surgeons, if they could find anyone willing to take cases now associated with a federal investigation. How long? Until the investigation concludes. Could be months, maybe longer. Margaret's voice softened. Kwame, I have to ask directly, is there any possibility someone could have misinterpreted your international patient program? Any gray areas in documentation or billing? He looked at her with tired eyes. Margaret, I've saved over 400 lives in my career. Every single organ I've transplanted was allocated through proper channels. Every international patient paid standard hospital rates. No premiums. No under-the-table payments. The program is so well documented that medical schools use it as a case study in ethical international care. Then someone is lying about you. The question is why? His phone buzzed with yet another call from a reporter. He'd stopped answering after the 15th interview request. His voicemail was full of messages from colleagues expressing support, patients' families asking what would happen to scheduled surgeries, and, unfortunately, a growing number of hate calls from people who'd seen the news coverage and made their own assumptions about a black surgeon accused of trafficking organs. Margaret, what happens to my patients? The ones ICE took? They're being held at a detention facility pending investigation. Those who are stable enough might be deported immediately. The others... She paused. The others might die if they don't get proper post-surgical care. The weight of that reality crushed down on him. Maria Santos needed daily monitoring of her kidney function. Ahmad Rafiq required precise anti-rejection medication timing to prevent his new liver from failing. Elena Vasquez was still at high risk for post-surgical complications. I need to see them. Kwame, you're not allowed anywhere near federal detainees right now. It would only make things worse. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed his mother's number in Atlanta. Dr. Amelia Mensah had been a pediatric nurse for 35 years before retiring. She'd sacrificed everything to put her son through medical school, working double shifts and taking out loans that took him years to pay back. She'd been so proud when he became chief of surgery. Mom, I can't talk right now. Baby, I saw the news. Tell me this isn't real. Her voice carried the pain of every black parent who'd watched their child achieve impossible things, only to see those achievements threatened by forces beyond their control. She'd lived through the civil rights era, had seen brilliant people destroyed by accusations and innuendo. It's not real. Mom, someone is lying about me. Then you fight. You hear me. You fight like I taught you to fight. Don't you dare let them take away what you've earned. After he hung up, Kwame sat in Margaret's office, watching the news coverage on her television. The story had gone national. Cable news panels debated organ allocation ethics, while showing file photos of him from medical conferences. Online comment sections filled with speculation and assumptions. Most painful were the interviews with other transplant patients and their families, people who'd never met him, but were now questioning the integrity of all international medical programs. The anonymous accusation was spreading like cancer through the medical community, metastasizing into broader suspicion of programs that served diverse patient populations. Margaret muted the television. Kwame, I need you to prepare for the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better. Federal investigations move slowly, and every day this drags on gives the story more time to define you. What are you saying? I'm saying that even when you're cleared, and I believe you will be cleared, the damage to your reputation might be permanent. Hospitals are risk-averse. They might not want to associate with a surgeon who was the center of a federal trafficking investigation, regardless of the outcome. Through her window, they could see more protesters arriving. The crowd was growing larger and more divided. Police barriers had been set up to separate opposing groups, and news crews moved between them, looking for the most inflammatory soundbites. At that moment, Kwame realized that someone hadn't just accused him of a crime. They'd weaponized the entire federal enforcement system against him, turning his greatest professional achievements into evidence of wrongdoing. They'd transformed his life's work into a cautionary tale about trusting successful black professionals. The question that haunted him wasn't just who had done this, but how they'd known exactly which buttons to push to bring down everything he'd built. 5 days after the raid, Dr. Patricia Wells sat in her office reviewing the financial devastation. The hospital's transplant program, which had generated $12 million in revenue over the past 6 months, was completely shut down. International patients scheduled for procedures had canceled, demanding refunds that the hospital couldn't afford to pay. Insurance companies were reviewing existing policies, threatening to drop coverage for any procedures connected to the investigation. But the human cost was far worse than the financial one. Maria Santos had been deported to El Salvador, despite needing daily medical monitoring for her new kidney. Her family had spent their life savings on the surgery, selling their house, and borrowing against their future to afford the procedure that would save her life. Now she was in a country with limited dialysis facilities, facing possible organ rejection without proper follow-up care. Ahmad Rafiq remained in federal detention, his liver function declining without the specialized anti-rejection protocol Kwame had designed for him. ICE medical staff weren't familiar with the cutting-edge medications required for his specific case, and his bilirubin levels were climbing dangerously. Elena Vasquez, the 16-year-old heart transplant patient, had been separated from her parents and held in a juvenile facility. Without access to her specialized cardiac medications, her new heart was showing early signs of rejection. Pediatric transplant specialists across the country had petitioned for her immediate release, but federal bureaucracy moved slowly. Patricia stared at the stack of transfer requests on her desk. Every remaining transplant patient wanted to move their care to other hospitals. Convinced that Metropolitan General was under federal investigation for good reason, nurses were quitting, afraid of being associated with a program under criminal scrutiny. Referring physicians were sending their patients elsewhere. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the young resident who had asked Kwame about ethical allocation during his presentation, knocked on Patricia's door. "Dr. Wells, I need to talk to you about something." "What is it, Jennifer?" "I've been thinking about that 911 call. About the timing." Jennifer sat down, her expression troubled. "Dr. Mensah's presentation was Tuesday evening. The call came in Tuesday night. Someone who was there, someone who heard those patient details and financial figures, made that call." Patricia had been thinking the same thing. "That's a serious accusation." "I know, but Dr. Wells, I've worked with Dr. Mensah for 2 years. I've seen every aspect of his program. There's no way he's trafficking organs. Someone who knows him, someone who was in that room, destroyed his career based on lies." Before Patricia could respond, her assistant knocked and entered with a grim expression. "Dr. Wells, there's been a development. The FBI crime lab finished analyzing the organ allocation records that were seized during the raid. And every organ Dr. Mensah transplanted was properly documented and matched through UNOS protocols. Every financial transaction was legitimate and properly recorded. The DNA analysis confirms that all organs came from registered donors and were allocated according to medical priority, not payment ability." Patricia felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. "So he's completely cleared?" "Not exactly. The FBI wants to expand the investigation to determine who made the false accusations and why. They're treating it as a potential case of filing false reports with federal agencies." Jennifer leaned forward. "Are they going to investigate everyone who was at the presentation?" "I don't know. But Dr. Wells, there's something else. The crime lab found something interesting in the 911 call analysis. The caller referenced financial details that weren't public information, details that were only shared during Dr. Mensah's presentation to hospital staff. Patricia's mind raced. The presentation had been limited to hospital personnel, medical staff, and a few family members who had been invited to the celebration. Someone in that room had taken Kwame's success story and twisted it into a weapon. "We need a list of everyone who attended Tuesday's presentation," she said. "I already pulled it," Jennifer replied, producing a folder. 63 people total. "But Dr. Wells, I think we need to look more carefully at the non-medical attendees." Patricia scanned the list. Most names belonged to doctors, nurses, residents, and administrators she'd worked with for years. But several were listed as spouse or family member, people who had been invited to celebrate the hospital's achievements, but who had no medical training or professional investment in the transplant program's success. One name jumped out at her: Karen Whitmore, listed as the spouse of Dr. Richard Whitmore, chief of cardiovascular surgery. "Jennifer, what do you know about Dr. Whitmore's recent cases?" "Which Dr. Whitmore, Richard or his wife?" "Richard, his surgical outcomes." Jennifer's expression grew uncomfortable. "There have been complications. 3 patient deaths in the past month, all potentially preventable. The medical board is reviewing his credentials. And there are rumors about possible malpractice suits." Patricia set down the attendance list and stared out her window at the news vans that still lined the street. A terrible possibility was taking shape in her mind. "Jennifer, what if this wasn't about Dr. Mensah at all? What if someone needed a distraction from their own problems?" "You think someone at the hospital made the false report?" "I think someone saw Kwame's success and decided to tear him down to protect themselves. Someone who knew exactly what details to include in that call, because they were sitting in the audience taking notes." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Richard Whitmore appeared in Patricia's doorway. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the doorframe. "Patricia, I need to talk to you." Jennifer quickly gathered her papers and left, closing the door behind her. Richard slumped into the chair she'd vacated. "This is all my fault," he said quietly. Patricia waited, her heart pounding. "Karen, my wife, she made that call. The 911 call about Kwame." The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Patricia had suspected, but hearing the words spoken aloud was still shocking. "Why, Richard?" "Because I'm finished. 3 surgical deaths, all due to my errors. Malpractice attorneys are circling. The medical board is investigating, and my insurance company is threatening to drop me." He looked up with hollow eyes. Karen couldn't stand watching me fall from grace. She thought if she created a bigger scandal, no one would pay attention to my problems. Patricia felt sick. "So she destroyed an innocent man's career to save yours." "She destroyed patients' lives too. I know that. Those people who were deported, who are sitting in detention centers because of a lie my wife told." Richard's voice broke. "I've been a surgeon for 20 years. I've never done anything this shameful." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't live with it. And because the FBI is going to figure it out anyway. They're analyzing the 911 call, comparing it to everyone who attended Kwame's presentation." Karen used her real voice, her real knowledge of the hospital. "It's only a matter of time before they trace it back to her." Patricia reached for her phone. "Richard, I have to report this immediately." "I know. But Patricia, Kwame's patients who are still in detention, is there anything we can do for them?" The irony wasn't lost on her. Richard Whitmore, whose career was ending due to surgical errors, was asking how to save the patients his wife had condemned to federal detention. "I'll call our legal team immediately. And Richard, you need a lawyer. Filing false reports with federal agencies is a felony. Karen is going to prison, and you might be charged as an accessory if they can prove you knew." After Richard left, Patricia sat alone in her office, processing the magnitude of the situation. An anonymous lie had triggered a federal investigation, destroyed international patients' lives, and nearly ended the career of one of the hospital's most talented surgeons. All because one person couldn't face the consequences of her husband's failures. But the story wasn't over yet. The FBI would want evidence, proof that could stand up in federal court. Karen Whitmore would face charges, but the legal process would take months or years to resolve completely. Meanwhile, Kwame remained suspended. His patients remained in detention, and the medical community remained divided over a case built entirely on lies. Patricia picked up her phone to call Margaret Chen, Kwame's attorney. For the first time in days, she had good news to share. But she also knew that clearing Kwame's name was only the first step in undoing the damage Karen Whitmore had caused. The International Medical Ethics Summit convened 3 weeks later in Chicago, drawing physicians, ethicists, and policymakers from around the world. What had been planned as a routine annual conference had become an emergency forum for addressing the crisis that had erupted at Metropolitan General Hospital. The Mensah case, as media outlets were calling it, had sparked international debate about organ allocation, immigration enforcement in medical settings, and the vulnerability of minority medical professionals to career-destroying accusations. Dr. Kwame Mensah sat in the green room backstage, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. He'd been invited to address the summit and present his side of the story, even though his case was still under FBI investigation. Margaret Chen sat beside him, reviewing her notes one final time. "The evidence is solid," she assured him. Richard Whitmore's confession, the voice analysis of the 911 call, Karen's browser history, showing she researched organ trafficking procedures before making the false report. The FBI is confident they have enough to arrest her today. "What about my patients?" That's the best news. Federal judges in 3 states have ordered the immediate release of all detained patients, based on the false nature of the original allegations. Maria Santos is being flown back from El Salvador as we speak, with full medical support during transport. Ahmad and Elena are already back at Metro General, receiving the care they need. Kwame closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 weeks' anxiety begin to lift. His patients were safe. The lies had been exposed. But he knew the hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding trust and moving forward from the damage that had been done. Dr. Sarah Kim appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Mensah, you're on in 5 minutes." The main auditorium was packed with over 800 medical professionals, their attention focused on the screens showing news coverage of the ongoing FBI investigation. As Kwame walked onto the stage, he could see photographers and video cameras positioned throughout the audience. This wasn't just a medical conference anymore. It was a national moment of reckoning. He approached the podium, looking out at faces that reflected the diversity of modern medicine doctors from every continent, representing every specialty and background. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical, all deeply engaged with the questions his case had raised. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice steady and clear. I went to sleep proud of my work and confident in my integrity. I woke up to federal agents arresting my patients and destroying everything I'd spent 12 years building. Today, I want to talk about what we've learned and what we must do to prevent this from happening to others. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. The lie that destroyed my program was simple, but devastating: that I was selling organs to wealthy international patients, while Americans died on waiting lists. It was designed to exploit our deepest fears about healthcare inequality and medical corruption. It worked because it sounded plausible to people who didn't know the facts. He clicked to his first slide, showing the actual organ allocation data from his program. Here are the facts. Every organ I transplanted was allocated through UNOS protocols. International patients paid standard hospital rates, not premiums. Revenue from the international program funded transplant care for 37 uninsured Americans who couldn't otherwise afford surgery. Our success rate exceeded national averages, and our patient satisfaction scores were the highest in the hospital's history. Murmurs of support rippled through the audience, but Kwame raised his hand for quiet. But facts didn't matter when the lie was told. Federal agents acted on anonymous accusations without verification, because the system is designed to respond quickly to reports of life-threatening crimes. Patients were deported from recovery beds. Families were separated. Lives were endangered based on nothing more than someone's calculated decision to destroy my career. He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle. The person who made that false report knew exactly which details to include, because she had attended our program celebration just hours earlier. She heard our patient success stories and turned them into evidence of alleged crimes. She took our proudest achievements and weaponized them against us. At that moment, Margaret Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, then stood up from her seat in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I've just received word from the FBI. Karen Whitmore has been arrested and charged with filing false reports with federal agencies, conspiracy to interfere with federal investigations, and civil rights violations. She is currently in federal custody." The auditorium erupted in applause, but Kwame held up his hands again. Justice is important, but it's not enough. We have to ask ourselves, how did we create a system where anonymous accusations could cause so much damage so quickly? How do we protect medical professionals from career-ending lies while still maintaining accountability for actual wrongdoing? Dr. Elena Rodriguez, president of the American Medical Association, stood up in the audience. "Dr. Mensah, what changes would you recommend?" First, federal agencies need verification protocols before acting on anonymous tips about medical professionals. A single phone call should not be enough to destroy a career and endanger patients. Second, hospitals need stronger protections for physicians who serve diverse patient populations, including international patients. These programs face unique vulnerabilities to false accusations. He clicked to his final slide, showing photos of Maria Santos, Ahmad Rafiq, Elena Vasquez, and other patients who had been affected by the false allegations. But most importantly, we need to acknowledge the racial and cultural dynamics that made this attack so effective. A black surgeon's success was portrayed as inherently suspicious. International patients were automatically assumed to be taking resources away from Americans. These assumptions allowed a lie to spread faster than the truth could catch up. Dr. James Patterson, a white surgeon from Boston, stood up. "Dr. Mensah, how do we address these biases in our own institutions?" By asking hard questions about our assumptions. When we hear allegations against colleagues, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, do we rush to judgment or seek facts when we see successful programs serving diverse populations? Do we celebrate innovation or look for reasons to be suspicious? The questions that followed were thoughtful and challenging. Medical professionals from around the world shared similar experiences: minority doctors facing heightened scrutiny, international programs struggling with suspicion, successful physicians being torn down by jealous colleagues. But they also shared solutions: peer mentorship programs, bias training for medical boards, transparent protocols for investigating misconduct allegations, and stronger professional support networks for physicians facing false accusations. As the formal session ended, dozens of doctors approached Kwame to offer support and share their own stories. Medical school deans pledged to use his case as a teaching tool about professional ethics and unconscious bias. International colleagues promised to work together to protect vulnerable programs from false accusations. Dr. Patricia Wells, who had flown in from Metropolitan General, found him near the stage. Kwame, the board met this morning. Your surgical privileges have been fully restored, effective immediately. We're also establishing new protocols to protect our physicians from unfounded accusations. What about the program? Reinstated and expanded. The international medical community has been watching this case closely. We've had inquiries from teaching hospitals around the world who want to partner with us. Your ordeal has actually increased global interest in our ethical approach to international transplant medicine. As the summit concluded, Kwame stood in the hotel lobby, surrounded by colleagues and new allies from around the world. His phone buzzed with messages from patients, former students, and fellow physicians who had followed his story and wanted to express their support. But the message that meant the most came from Maria Santos. Texting from her hospital bed at Metropolitan General, Dr. Mensah, "My new kidney is working perfectly. Thank you for fighting to bring me home. You saved my life twice, once with surgery and once with truth." 6 months later, Metropolitan General Hospital held another celebration, this one more subdued but no less meaningful. The transplant program had not only recovered from the false accusations, but had expanded to become a model for ethical international medical care. Medical schools were sending students to observe their protocols, and policymakers were using their case as an example of how to balance global medicine with domestic healthcare needs. Kwame stood in the same conference room where Karen Whitmore had planned his destruction, now addressing a group of first-year medical students who were beginning their clinical rotations. These young doctors, diverse in background and united in purpose, represented the future of medicine he'd always worked toward. Medicine is more than technique and knowledge, he told them. It's about trust, integrity, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. You'll face challenges, some of them unfair, some of them designed to test whether you really belong in this profession. One student, a young black woman from Somalia, raised her hand. "Dr. Mensah, how do we maintain our integrity when others question our right to be here?" He smiled, recognizing something of himself in her question. "By being so excellent, so ethical, and so dedicated to patient care that the truth becomes undeniable. By supporting each other and refusing to let lies define us. And by remembering that every patient we save, every life we improve, is a victory against the forces that want us to fail." After the session, he walked through the transplant unit, checking on patients and consulting with residents. The walls were lined with thank you cards from grateful patients and their families, testimonials to the life-saving work that continued despite the temporary disruption caused by false accusations. Maria Santos was there for her 6-month follow-up, her kidney function perfect and her smile radiant. Ahmad Rafiq had graduated from college and was starting medical school in the fall, inspired by the doctors who had saved his life and fought for his freedom. Elena Vasquez was back in high school, playing soccer with the heart that had given her a second chance at life. In the afternoon, Kwame received a call from Margaret Chen with an update on Karen Whitmore's case. She had pleaded guilty to federal charges and been sentenced to 2 years in prison, plus 5 years of probation. She was also required to pay restitution to the patients whose lives had been disrupted by her false accusations. Dr. Richard Whitmore had resigned from the hospital and lost his medical license due to the malpractice cases that had motivated his wife's desperate scheme. The surgical errors that Karen had tried to cover up had ultimately been exposed anyway, destroying both of their careers in the process. But Kwame felt no satisfaction in their downfall. Too many people had been hurt. Too much damage had been done for anyone to claim victory. Instead, he focused on the positive changes that had emerged from the crisis: stronger protections for minority medical professionals, better protocols for investigating misconduct allegations, and increased awareness of the racial biases that could be exploited to destroy innocent careers. As evening approached, he stood in his office looking out at the city skyline, reflecting on the journey that had brought him from the brink of professional destruction to renewed purpose and expanded impact. The false accusations had been designed to end his career, but instead, they had revealed the strength of the medical community's commitment to truth and justice. His phone rang, and he smiled when he saw the caller ID his mother in Atlanta. "How's my famous surgeon's son?" she asked, the pride evident in her voice. "I'm good, Mom, really good. I saw the article in the medical journal about your program becoming a national model. I always knew you'd change the world." "I just tried to save lives, one patient at a time." "That's exactly how you change the world. Baby, one life at a time." After they hung up, Kwame remained at his window as the city lights began to twinkle in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients to heal, new barriers to overcome. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had survived the worst lie that could be told about a surgeon. He had protected his patients, preserved his integrity, and emerged stronger than before. Most importantly, he had proven that truth, while sometimes slow to surface, was ultimately more powerful than even the most carefully crafted deception. The road ahead would not be easy. It never was for people who looked like him in spaces where few had succeeded before. But he had something now that no false accusation could take away: the unwavering support of a global medical community that had witnessed his character under fire and found it unbreakable. Dr. Kwame Mensah, Chief of Transplant Surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital, mentor to the next generation of diverse medical professionals, and living proof that excellence combined with integrity could overcome even the most vicious lies, turned off his office lights and headed home. Behind him, the transplant unit hummed with quiet activity as night shift nurses monitored patients whose lives had been saved by skillful surgery and ethical medicine. In detention centers and deportation proceedings, federal agents were working to reunite families and restore lives damaged by false accusations. Across the country, medical professionals were implementing new protocols to protect their colleagues from career-destroying lies. The ripple effects of one woman's desperate deception had ultimately strengthened the very system she had tried to corrupt. Karen Whitmore's lie had been powerful enough to trigger federal raids and destroy lives temporarily. But the truth had been more powerful still, capable of healing the damage and building something better from the wreckage. As Kwame drove through the quiet streets toward home, emergency vehicles raced past him toward the hospital, carrying new patients who would need the life-saving skills and unwavering integrity of surgeons who had learned to stand strong against any storm. The work continued. The truth endured. And somewhere in the city, lives were being saved by doctors who refused to be defined by the lies others told about them.